Before we wrap up with the show, just a reflection on the latest sentiments coming out of the Supply Chain Council, saying that legalizing South Africa's procurement bill is set to revolutionize procurement practices in the country and present a myriad of opportunities as well for supply chain professionals, businesses and communities alike. I am joined by Kamogelo Mampane, the Executive Chairman of the Supply Chain Council, for more. So thanks so much for your time. Prior to this interview, we were just talking about the Supply Chain Association. We didn't know that it had been around for such a long time. I mean, since 2010. You were excited, essentially, about the bill that was signed by the President. Just talk to us about exactly how you see it improving things for the better for your industry.
Thank you. No, thank you. Definitely, we believe, Mefifi, that it's going to streamline at a minimum level all the regulatory framework, legislations, policies, you name them, that was there in the country before. You know, for a supplier to interact with supply chain or procurement before, you had to read almost 700 odd policies, procedures, practice note, instructions, and many of them were actually in conflict with one another.
Sure.
And of course, for example, I mean, the two regulatory frameworks that we become so accustomed with, the procurement one and also the BEE. So all of these laws in the past, and there's so many case laws that we have in our country, where suppliers have actually taken the preferential procurement regulations to court because they were in conflict with the BEE Act. Mm-hmm. And these are coming from the same government. So it really didn't make sense that we had so many regulatory frameworks that are in conflict with one another. On the other hand, you have an SMME Act as well on the other side, which is also trying to support the very same thing that the Preferential Procurement Act was doing. So we are very happy that going forward, there's going to be at least one regulatory framework that is going to govern the space. Maybe
if you can also just help us understand historically what your experience has been. I mean, outside of the paperwork, not to dilute the importance of what you have just shared, but just in terms of the amount of business and work that the industry professionals have been able to do, and what some of the bottlenecks outside of the bureaucratic paperwork and all that have been.
Procurement is a very, very important lever in our country if you want to drive economic development or transformation. The procurement of goods, just in public sector, contributes about 25% of GDP. It's about 1 trillion rands that we spend by government procuring goods and services. And in the past, that particular procurement was not going to, for example, categories that are disadvantaged or disenfranchised before. For example, SMMEs, black businesses in the main, because you could not ring-fence opportunities for such categories. While government has been saying, and you might have heard Mefifi in the past, you know, the president saying 30% will go to businesses that are owned by women. But where was the regulation that was governing that? There was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. There were good intentions, but if it's not regulated and put in the policy, government institution cannot implement that. Because if they do, the Auditor General comes and say, hey, by the way, what you have done here, it's illegal. It's irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So we are happy now that because the spend, I mean, in the past, Mefifi, if a Transnet and Eskom issues a tender, big multinationals can come in from Asia, from China, participate. You can't stop that. Yeah. If the price is good, you have to give them the contract. I mean, for example, we know a very recent story in the country. We set up a very expensive facilities to manufacture vaccine. In the previous regime, what happened when Department of Health then issued a bid to buy a vaccine? It went to a multinational, right? And what happened to the investment? We lost that entire investment that was here because of procurement rules that we had. Now, in the current procurement bill or the Procurement Act, government entities can ring-fence some of those opportunities to small businesses, to black-owned firms, but more importantly so, to products and services that are done locally. Sure. Which is a step forward, because in the past, we know that the Constitutional Court set aside those rules to say you can't do this because you don't have laws to support small businesses. You don't have laws to support locally produced products. Now, the excuse is off because the regulations or the Act, at least, creates that framework for state organs to support those previously disadvantaged.
I mean, we saw something similar as well in the case of Eskom when the former CEO was trying to do what he thought was best to end load shedding, and he tried to suggest that, you know, some of the suggestions around procuring certain parts, as it were, from a local business was making things difficult because those parts were not available and the skills sometimes were not available in the case of that example. But I'm speaking to the bigger example of what we've also heard around the capacity of some of these SMEs to participate in such big government tenders. And I'd like to understand whether you think that this bill will drive a further acceleration of the transformation and the increasing of that capacity of skills base or not.
It has to, Mephi. One of the things that government entities need to do while they plan for their procurement activities, they need to publish what is called the demand management plans. So they have to say, these are the things that we'll be procuring in the next 12 months. Now, that is very, very important because industries in our country can then plan for those to participate in those products or in those procurement opportunities. But also the resources that are required within the government. A simple example. If, for example, one of the state organs issues a tender, another state organ also have to participate. If they have to create that opportunity for another state organ, they had to go through a normal tender process. I mean, that does not make sense. You're creating entities, especially if you think about the Denel environment, where we've actually killed the state-owned entities because now they have to participate. Companies like Petro SA is an example, where they have to participate in open markets. Now, how do they operate in open markets if they have to follow a tender process? That does not make sense. If you buy crude, you buy it at a spot price. What is that price at this moment? Now, you can imagine having to go through a tender process for them to do that. So it's not possible. But also what the bill has introduced, which is very, very important for us, it's a professionalization of the people that are in procurement. I mean, you can imagine, Mefifi, in the past, we used to have people that are caught wanting in another state organ.
Sure.
Later on, they pop up in another state organ, right? Because they've been found wanting and then they move around. So what we want to see going forward is that all the professionals must become members of a professional body. They must be registered. They must be on a database. They must have a license to practice. With that license can then be taken away if they are found wanting. Right. So that we don't want to see them in another state organ or they pop up in private sector as well. So the names of those people must be available. It must be transparent. But most importantly, professionalization is not just about registering people. Sure. It's about professional development over time. Infrastructure. Mefifi, we know the stories of infrastructure development. We know how long it takes to build a road, to build a pipeline, and the people that are involved in creating those infrastructures. We don't have the skills. Procurement people have not been given proper skills for infrastructure, and that's what we are hoping that this bill will at least enable that development in government. And
we are also hoping to just to see how quickly action is translated on the ground following the bill becoming a law. So, Mtate Mampane, you've introduced a new element into the market show here in South Africa, but thank you so much nonetheless for your time. Kamogelo Mampane, Executive Chairman of the Supply Chain Council.